Hey, it's good to see all of you and really great opportunity to just share all our collective learnings and expertise here. So I'm happy to introduce, go around the table a little bit. First up, I'd like to introduce Rebecca. She is the founder and president of the Community for Haitian Entrepreneurs and Startups, the Assistant Dean of Social Innovation at MIT Public Service Center, and the former She Builds Global Initiative Boston Ambassador. We also have with us Sarah Hodges, a partner at Pillar VC. She's also a board member of the New England Venture Capital Association and the founder, operator, and board member of multiple high-growth startups. We also have with us Mary, who is also the CEO and co-founder at Wave Incorporated and a former software engineer at, of course, the famous PillPack and Boston Hero. And very much as well as Christian Jones, founder and brand strategist at Neo Creative, Chief Growth Officer at Flipping Bricks University, and a branding instructor at General Assembly to boot. Personally, for myself, I'm a Harvard MBA, Forbes 30 Under 30, and have also launched and founded several high-growth startups as a founder and a speaker and a coach. That being said, I'm positively impressed by everybody around here today and can't wait to get cracking into this. So I think a lot of people have really been asking a question, which is, how do we go about doing this? What needs to be here? What needs to not be here in our pitch deck? How do we sell ourselves? How do we get started and do what needs to be done in order to get our ideas into reality? And I'm excited to share that everyone here has really personal experiences and have great opportunities and experiences to share. So just to warm everybody up, very quickly, just go around the table. What is the one thing that you see must be in your pitch deck? And then we'll dive into and go accordingly from there. Want to start first from Sarah?
Sure. So if you're a company that's raising a pre-seed or a seed stage round, the most important thing we look for is team, and it's often overlooked. I think, many people tend to put their team slide at the very end of their pitch deck, but it's absolutely the most critical component of any company that you're building. And so as much as you're spending time practicing all the other elements of your story, think about your personal story, your background, your experience, what makes you uniquely qualified to build this company, and really put that emphasis on the team up front.
How about you, Mary?
Yeah, I would also add that I think sort of facts to back up your market size are important. So, during our fundraise, we kind of had like, here's our big market. And we got some questions saying sort of like, how did you get to that number? Can you kind of justify that number? And I think having facts, in our situation, it was we're a beauty company, wigs, kind of like targeted to Black women. So it's like, how many Black women are there? How many of them wear wigs? Like what? How much do they cost? Like these sorts of things I think are helpful, especially if you are pitching kind of a market or a product that the person you're talking to isn't super familiar with.
Christian?
I like Sarah's answer a lot because I think people undervalue people. It's weird. But I think that, from experience, I realized that you can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't have the right team, it won't work. But also the opposite applies. You can have the most mediocre idea in the world, but if you have the best team, it will win every time. And I learned that really early on in my entrepreneurial journey of just having the right team and surrounding yourself with the right people. So don't undervalue people. But the other thing is really just understand yourself, meaning understand why you're doing it, meaning mission, vision, and core values. I also had understand how you can be of value. So really understanding your target audience, like who are you serving and how you can be of value to them. Because at the end of the day, I think sometimes people also make their business about them rather than making it about the customer. I've seen that way too many times when it comes to pitch decks and people explaining their business. It's kind of ego driven, like about them. But no, how can you be of value to the marketplace? Because the market is always right. And then understand your recipe for success. So if you understand how it is that you're going to execute upon your value promise, then you can pretty much make a case as to why this company is going to be successful. But I would like the value of three. So I always break things down to 3 simple steps. But those are my three steps as far as thinking through everything.
How about you, Rebecca?
Yes, that leaves me. I couldn't agree more with what has already been said. People first, and I would encourage the team to also articulate the why they care about their target customers' challenge and opportunity, and why they're the best people to do it. So that's what I'll add to that.
Amazing. And the fun one as well is what should not be in your pitch? Who wants to give a crack at that?
Should not.
I guess I won't point to one concrete thing, but I'll give general advice about what not to do. Don't overwhelm people with information. I think, particularly in this world of Zoom, where you have a very short amount of time to make a personal connection and build a rapport with an investor and get your story across, you want to tell your story in a really concise way that's direct, that's clear, that's compelling. And then you want to leave plenty of room for questions in the conversation so that an investor can guide the conversation to where they still have some concerns or open items. And so be mindful of the time. If you've got a 30-minute call with an investor set up, think about using that first 10 minutes for your pitch, which means that you have to be really crisp and clear and tight on your story and your slides. And then, as you go through the conversation, let that conversation start to peel back the layers and guide you to where you should dig in deeper and tell, your story in a more complete way.
I would say to save the details for appendix slides if you're using slides for your pitch deck. And I think also there's an over-reliance on slides. People should be able to share the story, the opportunity, and what there is to gain or solve in what order of magnitude within that 30 seconds, maybe even 10 seconds. And to Sarah's point, leave time for people to ask you more, and then for you to show them that you know your stuff.
So, I think we're starting to cover a little bit about what's in your deck, just kind of because everyone is focused on that, right? It's like, I need to make a PowerPoint deck. If I have a PowerPoint deck, I know what I need to say. And it's interesting to see that also people forget about, kind of like the other things that need to be there as well. We've heard of stories about the decks not synchronizing with the website and so on and so forth. Does anyone want to share about experiences about what should parallel between the website versus the pitch deck, for example?
Well, the website topic is a I wouldn't say it's complicated, but one of the biggest things I think people overlook is understanding what your target audience is for your website. Because I think sometimes people, especially when people who are already in business, whether it's targeting the audience and getting sales, or you have a website as a landing page as far as I call it like a brochure website, really outlining the information about the company. So to me, it really depends on where you're at and what you're trying to achieve with your website. I think there's more value in putting your website together to be of value to your customer. And then at the end of the day, for the investor, they want to see that you're actually in business and that you're actually, putting your theory into practice. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, especially when you're starting out, you're trying to bridge that gap between theory and theory and reality. So if you're able to articulate, say, hey, I have a theory and I prove my theory, I think that makes a marketable company for an investor. But I think that when people create websites, they don't have a lot of clarity of what the objective is for the website. I'll give you an example. I had a client who's a financial institution, and part of it was two sides to it. One of it was raising money from investors for investing, and the other part of it was getting people who are borrowers who are wanting to seek out funding. So it's like, okay, well, what is our goal here? Are you trying to target your borrowers, or are you going to target for your investors? Because the messaging you're going to use will be very different. So I think having clarity of your objective is really going to dictate what you're going to put on the website. And I think it's very basic, but it's something that gets overlooked when it comes to having your website being useful.
The question of sort of like deck versus website made me think of maybe this is a better answer to what should be in your pitch deck, but I think your pitch deck and the website should both be imbued with your brand. And I think that, you know, you shouldn't just have a pitch deck that's full of kind of like facts and information, and it could be a pitch deck for any company. I think someone looking at your deck should be able to see like this is, you know, this is this brand, like it's imbued with sort of the personality of the product or the company that you're building as well.
That's great. So, and I think we're starting to get a sense of the materials that are getting prepared before the meeting and everything. And let's dive into a little bit about that. We started talking about, you know, messaging and the brand, you know, in the deck and the website. I think for those who aren't familiar with marketing or pitching, could someone define what should be included in the brand message? Like, what are the key elements that need to be articulated and answered within the team before setting it out in the website and the pitch deck?
Yeah, I could take that one. So when it comes to a brand, I think pretty much already mentioned it in the previous question. A lot of times, this is not like the fun work, but it's the work that's necessary. It's, you know, like I said, understanding yourself, understanding how you can be of value, and understanding your recipe for success. So when you're talking about understanding yourself, it's really understanding vision, mission, and core values. So I think a lot of times, if you really dial back and understand what your vision is, your mission is, and your core values, my favorite one being the core values, because regardless of what business you create, if you have a founding team, those things are unwavering. Those are the things that are going to uphold, and those are the things that's going to build culture around your business and really get people to activate on whatever mission or vision that you're trying to achieve. So I think when it comes to branding and understanding your brand, mission, vision, core values, if you can get a strong sense of that, you're going to have a lot of clarity in your decision making. Give an example is when they talk about like Southwest Airlines, they said they had established their mission or vision of being the low price airline. But because they had a strong understanding of self, it informed every decision that they had to make in the future. So whenever they're asking a question of, okay, are we going to offer free water, for example, on the airline, the question now becomes, how is that helping us become the low price airline? So it just gave a lot of clarity and direction. And it gave you a true north for how to take your company. And I think with that, I think that's really the biggest piece. Once you understand that, everything else kind of figures itself out. But that'll be like my one key advice when it comes to how do you mold yourself into creating that message.
I think Christian absolutely nailed it. And, you know, when we talked about fundraising, we talked about the importance of like people and team, but also you have one opportunity in that first like minute to grab an investor's attention. And so if you have a crystal clear understanding of your mission and your vision and why it's so hugely transformative, lead with that. Like you should have an opening slide that just like puts that out there plain and simple. And it should be like just really emotionally compelling and hook that person in. And so the more clarity you can get on that, I think Christian is dead on. You know, the more powerful that will be for investors, for employees, for team members, for customers, for everyone who's in your orbit.
I'd also add that you want to ensure that what you're saying aligns with what the investor is focused or maybe foci are, because you can care about something as much as you want, but if that's not the focus area of the investor, or at least if you're not making the link to that, it might not land you what you want to.
Yeah, I think going off what you just said is, I've learned so many lessons in my life. Not all money is good money. So even before you even get to the investor, you got to understand like what is the investor looking for. So sometimes you don't even want to waste the time of, you know, do your research on the investor, so that before you even get to that point, it's not really about trying to speak to what they are wanting. You just already know what they want. So you already know it could be a match made in heaven anyway. So then you can have a lot of productivity in the conversation. So I think when it comes to investors too, it's just doing your research and understanding what it is that they're after, and do you align to that? Because, you know, like I said, not all money is good money, and you gotta be careful with what money you take from certain people. So yeah.
I'd also encourage inquiry so that you leave time to let the investor talk, so that you listen, and the better you listen, often the better you'll do.
So these are all the things that we need to do in order to have a successful brand message and have correct flow. Have you seen misaligned brand messaging kind of like detracting from credibility? Have you heard any horror stories of that not going well? Mary?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard horror stories, but I guess I wanted to address the question because I think that you are the only one who can sort of like say if your brand messaging is aligned or not aligned with your vision, if that makes sense. And I think that like we have had an experience of people trying to be like, oh, like, what if you did this? Like, wouldn't that be more aligned with like what your vision is? Or, trying to sort of give suggestions. And so I actually think, to anyone who like has a company or a vision, like make sure that you are, in your heart, like what is aligned with, what is or is not aligned with your vision, and don't let other people sort of sway you on that. I think that that's something that, you have to make, you are the person who knows, like you and your team and your founding team. And I think you have to make sure that you stick true to what you know, because especially once you go out and start investing, you just get a lot of advice, like just a lot of people sort of giving suggestions. And I think it's important to make sure that you know that you're aligned and then stick to that alignment.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mary, because when you're in the entrepreneurial world, you could, like, that's why I say those mission, vision, core values are so important, because if you're not truly grounded, you can get lost within this startup space, because everybody has an idea, everybody has a suggestion, everybody's an expert at everything. So it's easy for you to get swayed off path because you're like, oh, start doubting yourself, like, oh, maybe that will work. So when it comes to, understanding your company, you got to have a very strong sense of self. Like, okay, I know my customer better than anybody else. I know my business better than anybody else, and just be confident in that. And then once you understand that, it creates a filter. You take what you need and you ignore what you don't need. So it's really about understanding that like filter process of how to stay rooted. And I think the best way to stay rooted in that is understand those foundational elements. After that, it kind of gives you, it helps prevent you from getting lost in those suggestions that you mentioned. Because I have a client right now who's like frustrated because like everybody's telling me I'm doing this wrong, doesn't this. I'm like, okay, well, let's go back to the beginning. What was your mission? What was your why? And do their suggestions align to your why? He said, well, no, it's taking me off into this. I said, well, if you're going to transform it, make sure it's aligned to what it is you're trying to do, and that's your true north. So I completely agree with you, Barry, because it's easy to get lost in the sauce when you're hearing all these different inputs and getting a lot of feedback. Of, oh, they should stay focused. Stay focused.
I'll add to that. The hardest thing is if it's potentially money that's walking away from you. And that's happened to me where I had an investor for my for-purpose organization, Chess, that early on I was strapped for cash. I needed it. And this person had it. And this person said, well, you should go this way. And if you go this way, I'll fund you. And I remember saying to him, I'm sorry, this is not what we're about. This is the direction he suggested I take the organization wasn't where we needed to go. And I had to walk away from that. And years later, he was on a board that ended up funding a project, and he wrote some great things. So it's hard sometimes, but stick to that North Star.
That's a great war story, Rebecca. Sarah?
Not not a brand horror story per se, but you asked about misalignment with decks, and I think brand doesn't matter for every startup that's pitching in the early days at the pre-seed stage. We back a lot of technology companies where founders are still focused on proving out research, and brand is early for them. And so I think while it still can be a great exercise and an essential exercise to understand your mission, your vision, your purpose, and think about how that's embodied by your brand, for many companies it's not critical at the beginning, but for the ones for whom it is, I think the biggest misstep we see is people pulling together a deck, hastily without thinking about how important that brand is. And if you're building, for example, a consumer company where brand is going to be a pretty critical element of your company and its success moving forward, but your deck doesn't embody a brand that in any way seems like it would compel customers in that category and doesn't align with your mission and your values, that's sending a huge signal to investors that you might be off track right out of the gate. And so I think putting that time and energy into your deck up front actually is really critical in those businesses where brand is going to be a big piece of your value proposition.
That's so true. I've definitely seen that for myself where, it's a luxury, go to market and the deck doesn't feel luxury. And so there's a conversation that needs to happen, right? And if it's just like, well, we got to up it up. We need to use a fancier font. We can't use Arial and we can't use Helvetica anymore. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I think everybody here has been talking about something which is a tough part, right? Which is, talking to so many different people about that message, right? Your own yourself, your friends and family. We mentioned that, our trusted colleagues and teammates, and then our broader orbit of advisors and investors. How should one person think about the process of crafting that narrative, from the brand to the storyline, to the website, to the deck? How should they think about that process?
I can give an answer because I think it's something that we on my team think about a lot in terms of how do we tell our story? How do we tell our story in the most sort of compelling way? And kind of how do you tailor it to who you're talking to as well? Because I think it's, if you have just sort of like one story that you kind of tell and you can't like take cues from the person you're talking to about like what they're interested in or, what you should expand or contract kind of like based on who you're talking to. I think that's important to sort of be able to engage people in your story. But for us, it was really a process of just word vomiting. Like there's a concept of like shitty first drafts. And it's like, we really took the time to like write down or, say, like we would talk and record ourselves and write down everything that we wanted to say to get our story out. And there are 3 of us on our team and we would, tell our story to each other and kind of be like, okay, like this part is sort of where you lost me. Like this part was more interesting. Like I would, emphasize this. Like I think really practicing, like if you're someone who's pitching and talking a lot, taking the time to kind of tell your story to friends and family and gauge their reaction, because you want the person you're talking to, especially if it's an investor, to be interested. You don't want to bore people. And so, tell the story to people, watch them as you're talking and see, like, are they like, oh, okay. Or are they kind of like, are their eyes wandering off? Like, do they seem like they are, excited about what you're saying or not? And I think keep practicing that story until you get to something that is, both informational and entertaining, because people, are in meetings all the time, like especially on Zoom. And I think it's not a bad thing to try to, make people laugh, like make people smile, like make a connection to people. If you meet someone and, you're from the same place or you went to the same school or anything like that. So I think it's important to make sure that your story is sort of concise, but I think entertainment should not be overlooked.
I think not enough people, Mary mentioned like writing down everything, and not enough people do that to start out. I think that there's a natural impulse, particularly when someone's starting a new company. It's exciting to think about the visuals and visually seeing it all come to life. And so people start to create decks, start to create websites without actually doing like the work to map out the storyboard and how this all fits together. So I think that is a really critical component. And then another thing, which I know Mary has done extensively at her company Wave, is just talking to customers and listening to them, recording those conversations and understanding the words they use to describe the problem, the words they use to describe the solution that they're looking for, that they think they're looking for, and then, mirroring that in your brand and your messaging.
I couldn't agree more with what Sarah said. I have another venture that my husband and I are launching, and we're literally putting out a sample. We reached out to family and friends, and we have them testing the sample. We have a whole survey process, and we've actually asked them to list descriptors of our product. So where it's just like a dirty beta, like what do they call it, the minimum viable product, and just we're collecting a lot of feedback, and that's really going to inform where we take this. And I also want to say, have fun. just have fun in the process. And the journey has lots of highs and lows, but try to be as intentional and about having fun when you're launching something too.
Yeah, I agree from experience. So I do a lot of brand strategy and brand design. And my biggest lead generator is people coming to me wanting logos, the pretty stuff, right? I call it the fun stuff. But when they come to me, I'm always telling them to dial back and let's go all the way back to the beginning and understanding those messages, like you said, Mary, about brainstorming, word vomiting, and really, and Sarah, like writing everything. I was never a writer growing up, but ever since I started, this venture and me getting into branding, I've had to write a lot and documenting everything. So when I think about branding, let me just kind of like dial back a little bit, just give you guys my understanding of branding and how I conceptualize it. At the end of the day, branding is really comes down to reputation, so trust, right? Relationship, so how you relate to the customer, and reciprocity, meaning how people are engaging with your company. But it's also, when you talk about that reputation piece, it's about what you do over and over again. So it's about replicating your successes and permanently fixing your failures. So when it comes to that documentation process, like what's your recipe for success, and saying, hey, how can I replicate my success over and over and permanently fix my failures? In order to do that, you got to do it, track it, and analyze it. So when I'm thinking about branding as an organism, it becomes this big convoluted thing very easily, where it's like, okay, like where do I even start? But I've basically broken it down to like this step-by-step process of understanding mission, vision, and core values, to then understanding the customer. What I love what you said, Rebecca, I think Mary, you mentioned as well, was interviewing the customers. It's about how can you become customer obsessive. I think a lot of people who are listening can probably relate to this, where it only makes sense, but we get so ego driven because we invest so much time and energy into the idea, right? And the worst thing that can ever happen for you is like, I spent so much time and energy on this idea for it not to work. So that's a fear. Like, so you almost have an emotional attachment. It's almost like your baby. Like, you're not going to take this away from me. But at the end of the day, because people put so much time and effort into the idea, rather than putting time and effort into the customers that which they're trying to serve, you can pretty much avoid that heartbreak in a sense by being in that position. Okay, you know what? Step one, I said, understand yourself, right? So what is your why? Why are you trying to do it? What's your vision, mission, that sort of thing, right? The second part I said was understand how you could be of value. So you understand what the market is looking for, understanding what they need, and now you build for that. I think a lot of times people do it backwards. They have an idea. I'm going to build the idea and hope that the market wants it. And that's a very risky position to put yourself in. So if you work backwards, so start with the end in mind. Start where, okay, I know my mission, I know my vision, I know my why I'm doing it. Now let me start having conversations with people and see what they want, because the adoption rate and the friction point is a lot less when you build that way. And I think when you talk about the pretty stuff, Sarah, you mentioned like just getting caught up in the pretty stuff. It's like so many times I'm taking people come to me and say, hey, well, what do you like about what do you think about this color, this logo? Well, the logo is only a representation of what you're building. Focus on the business. Don't worry about the pretty stuff. That stuff will figure it out. It's like trying to create a word without a definition. Define it. You know what I'm saying? The definition on the word is only a way to shorten the definition. Like, I want to say this word instead of explaining it every single time. So when you build your company, define it. What are you here for? What are you trying to build? How can you be of value to the market? And the logo can just be a circle with a dot in the middle. And guess what? You have target. So it doesn't need to be a complicated visual pre-process. It's not an art project. It's a business. How can you be of value to your customer? I know it's a long-winded thing, but like that's one of the biggest things that I run into so many times when I'm running into a brick wall of clients is focus on the business, focus on the customers, be of value to the marketplace. The marketplace will be right every single time.
I'll add that I have the privilege of supporting social entrepreneurs at work every day at the Public Service Center at MIT. And so with social ventures where the ROI is the social benefit and maybe an intersection of that and profit, you can't start with the I, like the entrepreneur that thinks that they know everything, that doesn't consult the impacted who live with challenges and don't involve them along the process, really does more harm then good. So I can't stress that enough, particularly if you're in the social innovation, social entrepreneurship field, where you're really starting with the people first who are most impacted, and understanding from their perspective and enrolling them in the process. They, at the end of the day, in that sector of entrepreneurship, I'd say the best outcome is when you become redundant, and when people then have full ownership of their challenges. Say that.
Great. For those who have raised capital, we're gonna switch over to the investor side soon. As you kind of prepare to go in, I think it's interesting for us to ask ourselves, how did you think about positioning the brand as part of a compelling story for raising capital, right? So one part of it is the brand in terms of what customers want, but also the brand for what investors want. So I'm curious about what your approach was in thinking about that brand as you went in to go out to raise capital. I guess this is more for Rebecca and for Mary.
Yeah, I can answer this one. I think it's maybe one of those things that you look back maybe on what you did, and then you come up when you say, this is what I intended to do. But I think for Wave specifically, it was both a clear pain point in my life that I was trying to solve. And I think that the reason that I felt like I could solve it by starting a company was that I had been interested in startups, and I had been looking at other companies. And so I think when I, tell my story, it's kind of both in the vein of like, here is this lifelong kind of, I talk about like my hair journey, and just like how hair is being a big part of my life. I like wrote my college application essay on hair. Like, I was always like, what my hairstyle was at each sort of point in time, I think was sort of crucial to my identity. And there's this like long personal narrative that kind of starts from birth that, ties in hair. And then I think what really got me to Wave was like, I just purchased a pair of like Warby Parker glasses, and I was like, oh, that was awesome. And then I'm like trying to buy a wig, and I was like, well, that was terrible. And so I'm thinking like, there's some disconnect here. And so, but I think if you're an investor, you're like, okay, like, you're in this sort of story, you're, comping it to other companies that I, think had good outcomes. And it's, I think you're showing me that you sort of like understand the sort of like startup world maybe. And so I think it's about making sure that, I think it's sort of about like aligning kind of like your personal, experience, and showing that like you're the right person to sort of like start this company, because it, the personal story makes sense with kind of like a larger landscape of like, here is, how this company fits into the trends that we're seeing sort of like outside of this one industry. And here's why like right now is the right time for this company to exist. And here's, why it's, maybe sometimes you don't always want to be like the completely revolutionary idea. Like, I think it's awesome when, come in with like an Uber or something, and it's like, yeah, this has never been done before, an Airbnb. And it's like, we're going to invent a whole category. But I think you can also say like, here's like, a little bit of proof of, some way that something like this has worked before. And here's me applying it to a very personal category. And it makes sense why I'm the one doing this category. I think that helps to have a compelling story that way.
Yes, I totally agree. I think that the personal narrative and how it links to hard numbers about the reality of the market, or the problem space, opportunity space. And then also I'd add some pieces about what your plans are, and what it is that you're offering that will help you close a gap, or move a needle, or gain market share that others aren't necessarily doing.
So, on the other side of the table, from an investor and also from a consultant perspective, how should founders be thinking about how to land a productive meeting now that they have this, story and narrative and thinking in place?
I think there's been a lot of talk lately about why warm introductions are broken, because it means investors are really limited to their initial circle and their initial network. The reality is most investors really respond well to warm introductions. And so it's the state of the world today. And I think there are a lot of people who are doing really interesting things to try to like innovate in this category and create better ways for investors to meet founders who might not be 1 degree or 2 degrees away. But I think keeping in mind that that is how a lot of folks operate today, think about how you can network your way into an investor. And it might be through, I think we met Mary through Yvonne Howe, who was a co-founder of our fund and was involved with one of our portfolio companies. Getting an introduction through a founder in the existing portfolio of that investor is just about the best thing you can do, because they made the choice to back that founder. And so like getting that founder's stamp of approval on the way in is a really great signal. But we get introductions through our lawyers, our accountants, people who are working inside our portfolio companies, all sorts of people. And so it might not be 1 degree away. It might be someone who's 4 degrees away. And then you get to know that person and that person introduces you to the investor, but that's one way. And then if you are trying to reach out to an investor through cold outreach, flattery works. I get emails from people that say, I read this blog post of yours and here's what really resonated with me. And that's a nice hook in. You're like, oh, this person took that time to read my blog post. I got to reply to this one. We actually do read every single cold outreach email at Pillar, and we try to respond to every cold outreach email, but the ones that hook you in are the ones that like show some additional care and some additional research that really are more personalized, or where the voice of the founder really comes through in that email. And you think like, wow, like if this person can speak to me in this language that's hooking me in a cold email, then I got to get on the phone with this person and meet them, because this is really engaging.
I want to make one point sort of on networking too, because I think, I've also heard, and that is how I was introduced to Sarah, sort of it is through those introductions, but I think that networking can be sort of like intimidating to people, but I think it's hardest when you're specifically networking for a goal. And I think it's easier when you don't even realize that you're networking. So it's like the person who ended up introducing me to Sarah, Yvonne, like, I didn't plan to raise capital. Like when we first, like, when she sort of became a friend and a person in my life, it wasn't like, oh, like I would love one day to be introduced to an investor. Let me like network with this person. So I think that if that's maybe something that you want, or, I think in general, networking is a good skill to sort of hone, but I think it's easiest to do when you're just doing it because you're just meeting people and you're talking to them and you're asking questions and you're forming relationships. And I think it's more about like making yourself open to meeting people and learning about what they do, because you never know who you actually are like networking with. You never know who's going to be that like one person away from, someone who might change your life. And so I think it's about kind of, I think it's just about opening yourself up. And again, I would say it's easiest to do when you don't have this like thing in the back of your mind, like, I really need this person to give me an opening so that I can ask this question. I think it's best when it just happens naturally. And that's through just opening yourself up to meeting people and, asking questions and, making friends. So.
Yeah, I love the point that you said about making friends, Mary, in the relationship building, because I think networking, I don't know if that's really even a good word to use anymore. We really should just be relationship building, like looking to connect with people, have real human relationships with people. And that's what builds your network. Actually, I don't think networking builds your network. So once you like form these authentic bonds with people, and then the rest happens, I'd say, from there.
I absolutely love this point from Mary. I think as a founder and a CEO, it is a very lonely journey. Sometimes you're the only person who is sitting in that seat inside your company. And so that web of relationships and that support system and community becomes absolutely critical for you along the way. And I also couldn't agree with Rebecca and Mary more that some of the best relationships start from you giving, start from you like really just being open to anything and not having a really like transactional objective in mind. But I think many founders in the early days underestimate the power of having that community of support. They're very focused on like narrowly with tunnel vision building the thing that's in front of them, and don't realize like how many doors that will open up and how powerful that community will be, just as people to turn to and lean on and get advice along the journey. So start early.
Awesome. So we're going to we've got a whole bunch of questions. and we're going to try to knock them out as quick as possible because there's quite a few of them. So generating lots of thoughts. So I think there's two broad buckets that I'm seeing in the questions. One is more about traction with customers, and one is more about traction with investors. So I'm going to start quickly with the customers first. And I think there was a question that was to start off, question directly at Mary, but you talk about creating a new category, right? So for cash-strapped startups, how can they afford to get started creating categories? Is it expensive to educate the users?
Yeah, I mean, I think one way, maybe this isn't the start that you had in mind, but one thing that's very easy to do is to just start talking to people. And I think that that was sort of the first thing we did. So we wanted to create this new type of beauty company. We were really inspired by Glossier and Into the Gloss as a blog, like the fact that this blog existed before they then started the makeup brand. So we're thinking like, what can we how can we, use content as a vehicle to also both, produce something on our social and talk to customers. And so we started doing this blog post called Her Hair Journey, where the first person that we did was my cousin. And then from there, now they're not just my cousin, but we talk to different women about their hair journeys. And we just say like, hey, like, let's just, most of them are like college age, or, you find who your demographic is. And everyone likes to talk about themselves. Like, especially, there are people who get tired of talking about themselves. That's way less people than the people who want to talk about themselves. And so, we just say like, we'd love to just talk to you about your hair journey. And it was honestly, when we first started, we had a sort of vague idea of what we wanted. We knew we wanted to create a better hair company, like in the Black hair space. It was in doing all of these different hair stories and hair journeys that we realized like, we're seeing actually a very similar arc along a lot of these stories. And they're kind of ending in like, this product of, and not even ending, but it's like wigs are coming up in a similar way each time. And then, that informs then how we talk about wigs and how we brand them to people, because I think Rebecca, you mentioned like you doing research and sort of like mirroring people's language kind of back to them. And it's not even, I mean, not to do it sort of like maliciously, but just to say like, this is how everyone's talking about it. And this is how, we are going to make sure that our messaging reaches you, because we know that this is the way that you sort of want to hear about this thing. And so I think if you're defining a new category and maybe you're trying to prove to someone why it works, like nothing is better proof than stories, video, audio, quotes, from people that you've actually spoken to. And so I think that, and if you can get people sort of talking in narrative, so it's like, you don't ask them like, do you want this or do you want that? But you say, can you like describe to me this or that, or tell me about your hair journey, is like the question that we often start with. And then you go and ask questions off from there, but you can figure out what people want. And then I think it's also a really great brand building exercise as well, because every single woman that we talk to, like now she has a personal connection to Wave, like she's spoken to us and she is going to tell her friends about it, about it. And we photograph them and we turn it into a post that goes on our Instagram. Now she's sharing it with her friends. And it's all just from having a conversation that helps us from like a market research perspective. We're also building our brand.
Okay, next question. Thank you so much, Mary. So for Rebecca, there's a question, I think you're best suited to answer this question. So I think there's two questions for people who are doing business to business, and they feel like they're fighting against big incumbents, companies that already have established brands, established contracts. And so they're thinking about how to crack hospitals or try to get into a contract. How should they think about going B2B and creating a brand that says something?
Well, the first thing I would look at is, well, what are the big brands overlooking? So I would make yourself more niche, and because big brands, they can't capture and cover everything. And there are certain areas sometimes where a brand or a company is just too big to do well, and a smaller company can do better. So I would look for those pockets. And as far as how do you get into these sorts of like hospitals, for example, I have my brother who's running a home health healthcare business in Connecticut. So I get to hear stories via him. And the way that they connected with hospitals is they actually have, there are a lot of nurses in our family. So there were people that introduced folks to them to the right folks there. I think to Sarah's point where she mentioned that different different organizations or companies that work with that target company or business could be a really nice way in that's warmer. That's what I would suggest.
Next question I have would be for Christian. So someone's asking, like, do you have any suggestions for what is important to build trust with customers?
Important to build trust with customers. Well, it's really about, like we mentioned, we talk about here, right there, we talk about credibility, right? I think we talked about, you know, why you qualified to do the job. Having a strong understanding of what they need, you know, once again, being very customer centric. You know, I love what Mary did. It was basically about the one question survey, really. How can you, like, for instance, with us, with real estate, you know, I have two questions. I said, hey, do you own any investment properties? If not, why not? And I make it a very general question because I get a lot of feedback. Is it money barrier? Is it, I don't know how to do it? Like, what is the biggest barrier? Because once I figure out that barrier, I can address it directly. So when it comes to building trust, it's just like, at the end of the day, no one wants to be sold anything. Everyone wants to be helped. And I know a lot of startups, a lot of founders, like, hey, I don't want to come off as too salesy. I don't want to be that person that's like trying to be sleazy and cheesy and things like that. The best way to not to do that is to figure out genuinely how to help. So when you talk about building trust and credibility, if I can articulate very well to you what your problems are and how to solve it, that's worked 10 times out of 10 with with all my clients. It's about, okay, this person clearly understands what I need, clearly knows how to solve it. So let's do it. You know, I've had people who have gotten customers without a freaking website. And like, people are like, how would you do that? Well, it's because we had genuine connections, genuine relationship with the customer. And the customer is like, okay, wow, like, how did he do that? He's basically almost psychic. So when it comes to building that trust and credibility, I think people put a lot of weight on like this, oh, I gotta be on Time Magazine and Washington Post and all sorts of things. But I think start with the end in mind, but start small. Start small, think big, scale fast. So starting small is having those one-off. It's not scalable. I'll say this. It's not scalable if you're first starting out, but it is super valuable because it's going to help you get traction. Growth in the startup game is not linear. It's not like a linear slope. It's an exponential growth. So it's going to look like you're not making any traction at the beginning, but over time, it does hit this spike point where all of a sudden things take off. But if you're talking about building trust and credibility, like, just get the client or customer that trust that you understand their problem and that you can solve it. And if you really have to secret sauce, it's going to work.
So now switching tack slightly now to traction with investors. A question that people have asked was that, how do investors evaluate a strong team, right? You know, basic products and so forth, but what, from your perspective, makes a strong team?
I'll jump in and answer this one. So we look for 3 core qualities in founders. So the first is really a blow through walls mentality, which is really resilience. It's when you get knocked down, you can pick yourself back up, you can find your way forward. And not just once, but over and over again, because that really embodies the startup journey. Like, there are lots of highs, but there are also a lot of lows. And so you got to have resilience. And then the second quality we look for is, it's kind of a few things rolled into one. It's curiosity, it's self-awareness, knowing what you're good at, but then also knowing where you're not strong and where you need to seek outside counsel, and being willing to seek that outside advice. But I think, you know, Mary made a great point. You're going to get so much advice from so many people during this process as a founder. You have to have conviction. You have to be able to make decisions. You have to really not get blinded by analysis paralysis and be able to kind of pick a path forward and go with it, even if it means it's a big bet and it's a risk. And then the third quality we look for is really the ability to create momentum. And this is sales ability. It's, you know, storytelling capacity. It's, can I get people excited about my vision, excited about my mission? Do I get team members to want to join me? Can I convince advisors to come on board? Can I get executives and co-founders to work alongside me when I have like almost no money? Like, there is a real power in being able to create momentum and get people to want to like join that path with you. And, you know, I think personally, I got all of those things from Mary. When I met Mary, I was like, okay, this is a very early company. There aren't a lot of proof points. When you talk about traction, there aren't a lot of metrics here, but in this person, I see the capacity to create something big because, you know, when all three of those qualities are present, it's just a really powerful recipe for success. Because, you know, in the early days of a company, we always say, like, whatever you're building today, 12 months from now, it's going to look entirely different. And the only thing that's going to be the same is the person. And so much of what we look for is the CEO and then that team that they've been able to bring around them to build the company and get it off the ground.
So awesome, Sarah. Sarah, you also touched earlier on about the value of giving away value. You know, an audience basically member asked about that and wanted to ask Mary, if you could share from your angle, having worked with Sarah, what the value is of giving away value.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's kind of like we have this big vision. On some level, you need capital to build the vision, but that's not the only thing. I think when you look for an investor, it's not just about money, because even though money is hard to get, money is also in some ways easy to get because there's capital out there. And if, you know, one investor will give you money, it's possible that more than one investor will give you money. And so then I think it comes to really looking at the person that you're going to be working with, because especially when it comes to venture scale, it's like, this is now like a 10-year journey that Sarah and I have embarked on. And so it's like, okay, do I want to be working with this person for 10 years? Like, am I okay with, you know, being on Zoom, like being in person with this person, like having them like in my board meetings, like just going to their kids' soccer games? Like, I don't know. It's like, yeah. Are you okay with having this person being part of your life? And so I think so on some level, you asked me sort of like why to take on investors. You need the money, but I think it's about finding a partner as well. It's about finding someone who, you know, knows more than you do about certain things. And I think when it comes to being a founder, it's really important to know what you know and know what you don't know. And it's like, I know that this is the right company that I should be building. I know that there's a need for this product. Maybe I don't know like the best way to like put this pitch deck together, or like I don't know like how to strategically set myself up for the next round, or I don't know, you know, how to find like a part-time CFO. Like, you know, there are so many things that I've already learned from Sarah, like in these last couple months of us working together. And I think that you take on capital both for, you know, the money to be able to make your vision a reality, but then too, I think for the partnership and the network that it opens up and the sort of like support on this journey as well. And a little bit too, I would say the accountability. I think that if you're kind of just building something for yourself, I think it's really hard to self-motivate. I think that, you know, founders obviously have some level of self-motivation because you wouldn't have gotten to the point where you're pitching to the investor in the first place. But once you take in capital, you're like, okay, I have to make this work. Like like it's not just for me now. I can't just wake up one day and say like, I'm tired, like I'm, you know what I mean? I'm just gonna like go to Thailand or something and just like chill. Like, I don't know, like you have a level of accountability. And I think that that's important too, especially if you've sort of like never done it before. It's kind of like, I've locked myself in, like I know that this is like what I'm doing. And so I think that on some level that's nice to have kind of like people who are going to check in on you. And even the frequency program that Pillar does that I signed up for, and that's sort of also how kind of Sarah and I built our relationship. Part of the reason why I signed up for that program was that I was working full time at PillPack and I was doing Wave, and we'd been doing it sort of part time for about 2 years. And it was clear to us, like, you know, we were 3 friends in college and we all had other things we were doing, that it's kind of like now or never. Like it's either going to take off now or it's going to kind of die now, because we've been doing it sort of like part-time for this long. And so I figured if I enter this program, at the very minimum, it's a weekly check-in of like, did you do anything on your business this week? Yes or no? And so I was like, you know, it's good to have that sort of accountability. So I think that it's about, you know, making sure you have the capital you need to succeed, finding the right partner, but then also having that level of, you know, just someone else who's going to care whether you do it or not.
Awesome. Coming on time now. So second last question. So Rebecca, very quickly, you know, you've had the opportunity to work with so many startups. Have there been any memorable key talking points or keywords that you felt have been like magic keys, or, you know, resonate with you a little bit more than other key phrases?
Hmm. From these startups or?
From the startups that you met or founders that you supported along the way. Yeah.
I don't know if there were key phrases. I mean, there are certainly individuals that are just incredible. I mean, I've met people who have made me cry, just based on who they are, their conviction, their passion. So I can't say there are memorable phrases or particular words, but they're memorable people, and just who they are, their passion is just inspiring. And to Mary's point, that that, and I think it's also to Sarah's point, those are the people that attract the the supporters, right? And people just want to get in their camp and they want to help them out. And so that's what I think is the best answer I can give to that.